Hello all. Let us now look at Gothic art in Germany and Italy. Our objectives as usual are acquire the basic vocabulary, concepts and criteria for understanding, interpreting and analyzing Gothic art, encounter significant works of the period and enable them to study later works influenced by this period. Understand and appreciate the role of values, beliefs, ideas in shaping the art of the times. In this chapter, we focus on Gothic art in Germany, Italy and other countries of Europe. We'll look at the technical aspects, plans and detailing in German Gothic buildings. You will look at notable buildings in Italy. We will look at interiors, ornamentation, aspects like towers and its secular monuments. Let us begin with German architecture. Gothic architecture had become the architecture of France in the 12th century. But Germany was still rooted in its Romanesque concepts. Romanesque cathedrals continued to be built east of the Rhine. As a result, over 50 years, German architecture was a mix of Romanesque and Gothic forms. St. Castor and Koblenz, built as late as 1208, is wholly Romanesque. Some comparative dates illustrate this point. The first French Gothic cathedral at Saint Denis was completed in 1157. The chancel of Notre Dame in Paris was completed in 1170. The German buildings were made as late cathedral at Chartres in 1220. The cathedral at Worms in about 1230 and the Westwork at Mainz in 1239. In Germany, even when the pointed arch and vault had finally come into general use, the plan and the constructive system still remained prominently Romanesque. The western apse and short century of the earlier plan was retained. There was no triforium. A clerestory was insignificant and the whole aspect low and massive. The Germans avoided at first, as did the English, the constructive oddcases and difficulties of the French Gothic, but showed less of invention and grace than their English neighbors. When, however, through the influence of foreign models, especially the great French cathedrals, and through the employment of foreign architects, the Gothic styles were at last thoroughly domesticated. A spirit of ostentation took the place of earlier conservatism. Technical cleverness, exaggerated ingenuity of detail and constructive tour de force characterized most of the German Gothic work of the late 14th and the 15th century. This is exemplified in the slender mullions of Ulm and lofty and complicated spire of Strasbourg and the curious traceries of churches and houses in Nuremberg. Chronologically, the periods may be broadly stated as follows. The transitional period 1170 to 1225, the early period 1225 to 1275, The middle and the decorated period 1275 to 1350. The florid 1350 to 1530. These divisions are, however, far less clearly defined than in France and England. The development of forms was less logical and consequential, and less uniform in the different provinces than in those western lands. Let us understand the technical aspects of German Gothic architecture. In terms of construction, German Gothic architecture created broad wall surfaces with small windows. A general massiveness and lowness of proportions were preferred to the more slender and lofty forms of true Gothic design. Square vaulting bays were persistently adhered to, covering two aisle bays. Plans. The plans were more varied than in any other European countries. Some churches like Naumburg retained the Romanesque system of a second western apse and short choir. Polygonal eastern apse and without ambulatory is seen in the St. Elizabeth in Marburg, the Cathedral of Ratisbon, Ulm and Vienna, and many other churches. In the 13th century, French ideas led to the adoption of a number of cases in Chevet, with a single ambulatory and series of radiating apsidal chapels. The cathedrals at the Magdeburg and Altenburg, Cologne and Freiburg, Lübeck, Prague and Zwettl in the St. Francis at Salzburg and some other churches follows this plan. Cologne Cathedral, by far the largest and most magnificent of all, is completely French in plan, uniting in one design and leading characteristics of most notable French churches. It has complete double aisles in both nave and choir. A typical German treatment was the eastward termination of the church of the polygonal chapels, one in the axis of the each aisle, the central one projecting beyond its neighbors. Detailing. When it followed the French patterns, German window tracery emerged very beautifully, though it faulted its mechanical stiffness and technical display in overstandardness of shafts and mullions. In 15th century, ingenuity of geometric combinations took the place of grace of line, and later the tracery was often tortured into a stone caricature of rustic work of interlaced and twisted boards and twigs, represented with all their bark and knots, branch tracery, the carving of foliage in capitals, finials, etc., calls for no special mention for its originality or its departure from French types. Let us look at notable buildings of the period. The Golden Portal of Freiburg, 1190, perhaps the first distinctly Gothic work in Germany. Gelnhausen and the Aschaffenburg are early 13th century examples. Pointed arches and vaults appear in Apostles and St. Martin's churches at Cologne. It reached complete ascendancy in Alsace, in the Strasbourg, nave 1240 to 1075, in Baden in Frisburg nave 1270, and in Prussia at Cologne 1248 to 1320. Strasbourg Cathedral is especially remarkable for its facade. Cologne Cathedral began in 1248 by Gerhard of Riel in imitation of the newly completed choir of Amiens, was continued by Master Arnold and his son John, and the choir was consecrated in 1322. The nave and west front were built during the first half of the 14th century, though the towers were not completed till 1883. Unfortunately, its details, though pure and correct, are singularly dry and mechanical, while its very uniformity deprives it of the picturesque and varied charm which results from a mixture of styles recording the labors of successive generations. More peculiarly, German are the brick churches of North Germany, where stone was almost wholly lacking. In these, flat walls, square towers, decoration of colored tiles and bricks are characteristics, as at Brandenburg, St. Godehard and St. Catherine 1346 and 1400. At the Pretengelo and Tangerbunde, Königsberg and the Lübeck possesses notable monuments of brick architecture in the churches of St. Mary and St. Catherine, both much alike in plan and in the flat and the barren simplicity of their exteriors. Brick Gothic German Backstein Gothic is a specific style of Gothic architecture common in Northern Europe, especially in Northern Germany and the regions around the Baltic Sea without natural rock resources. The buildings are built more or less using only bricks. Stralsund City Hall and St. Nicholas Church are good examples of this style. Cities such as Lübeck, Rostock, Wismar, Stralsund, Greifswald and various towns in present-day northern and western Poland are shaped by this regional style. A model for many northern German churches are St. Mary's Lübeck, built between 1200 and 1350. The building of Gothic churches was accompanied by the construction of guild houses and the construction of town halls by the rising bourgeois. A good example is Gothic Town Hall, 13th century at Stralsund. There is also Bremen Town Hall, 1410, and the reconstructed City Hall of Münster, originally from 1350. The dwellings of this period were mainly timber-framed buildings, as can still be seen in Goslar and Quedlinburg. Quedlinburg has one of the oldest half-timbered houses in Germany. The method of construction used extensively for town houses of the medieval and Renaissance periods lasted into 20th century for rural buildings. Let us now take a look at what was happening in Italy. Italian Gothic architecture was very regional and lacked any unity of principle. Each province practiced its own style of building. The Italians were better decorators than builders and cared little of Gothic structural principles. Mosaic and carving, sumptuous altars, tombs, veneerings and inlays of the colored marble, broad flat surfaces to be covered with painting and ornament. To secure these, they were content to build crudely, to tie their insufficiently buttressed walls with unsightly iron tie rods, and to make their church facades mere screen walls in form wholly unrelated to the buildings behind them. The first Italian Gothic edifices were Cistercian abbeys. They spread in the whole Italian territory, often adapting the construction techniques to the local traditions. There were, in fact, brickwork edifices in the Pianura Padana, while stone prevailed in the central Italy and Tuscany. In the latter was sometimes present the bichrome wall decoration from the local Romanesque tradition. The most important edifices include the Chiarevole Abbey in the northern Italy and Casmari Abbey in central Italy. Among the non-Cistercian buildings of this century, which were influenced by the Gothic style, though still presenting important Romanesque features, are the Parma Baptistery and the Benedetto Antelmi, the Church of St. Andrea in Vercelli, also featuring Antelmi's influences. Moving on, the various Gothic structures in Italy. The greatest monuments of Italian Gothic design are the cathedrals, and which, even more than was the case of France, the highly developed civic pride of the municipalities expressed itself. Chief among these half civic, half religious monuments are the cathedrals of Siena, begun in 1243, Arezzo 1278, Orvieto 1219. Florence, the Duomo St. Maria del Fiore began 1294, and Arnolfo the Combo Lusa St. Martino 1350, Milan 1389 to 1418, St. Petronio at Bologna 1390. Milan is the largest of all Gothic cathedrals except Seville. San Petronio was planned to be 1600 feet long. The present structure, with its three broad aisles and flanking chapels, being merely the nave of intended edifice. The Duomo at Florence is 50 feet long and covers 82,000 square foot, while the octagon at the crossing is 143 feet in diameter. The effect of these colossal dimensions is, however, as in a number of these large Italian interiors, singularly belittled by the bareness of the walls, by the great size of constituent parts of the composition, and by lack of architectural subdivisions and multiplied detail to serve as a scale by which to gauge the scale of the assembly. Let us now understand about interiors. It was doubtless intended to cover these large unbroken wall surfaces and the vast expanse of the vaults over naves of extraordinary breadth, with paintings and colored decoration. This would have remedied their present nakedness and lack of interest, but it was only in a very few instances carried out. The double church of the Saint Francisco at Assisi, decorated by Cimabue and Giotto, and other early Tuscan painters. The Arena Chapel at Padua, painted by Giotto, the Spanish Chapel of S.M. Novella, Florence, and the East of S. Croce, Florence, are illustrations of the splendor of effect possible by this method of decoration. The bareness of effect in other unpainted interiors was emphasized by the plainness of the vaults, distinctive of minor ribs. The transverse ribs were usually broad arches with flat soffits, and vaulting was often sprung from so low a point as to leave no rooms for a triforium. Mere bull's eyes often served for clerestory windows, as in St. Anastasia at Verona, St. Petronio at Bologna, and Florentine Duomo. The feature which most marks all Italian Gothic is indifference to the true use of the pointed arch. Everywhere arches are constructed which could not have stood for a day had they not been held together by iron rods. There was none of that sense of the unities of art which made a northerner so jealous to maintain the proper relations of all parts of his structure. In Nicola Pisano's works, the arch mold rarely fits the capital on which it rests. The proportions of buttress to the apparent work to be done by them are bad and clumsy. The window traceries look like bad copies of some northern tracery, only once seen in a hurry by an indifferent workman. No life or development or progress in the work. If we look at the ground plans of Italian Gothic churches, we shall find nothing whatever to delight us. The columns are widely spaced so as to diminish the number of vaulting bays and to make the proportions of the oblong as vaulting bay very ungainly. Clustered shafts are most unknown, the columns being plain cylinders with poorly sculptured capitals. There are no triforium galleries and clerestory is generally very insignificant. Ornamentation now. Applied decoration plays a large part in all Italian Gothic designs. Inlaid and mosaic patterns, panelled veneering and colored marble are essential features of the exterior decoration of most Italian churches. Florence offers a fine example of this treatment in the Duomo and its accompanies campanile or bell tower designed by Giotto 1335 and completed by Gaddi and Talenti. This beautiful tower is an epitome of Italian Gothic art. Its inlays, mosaic and veneering are treated with consummate elegance and combined with encrusted reliefs of great beauty. The tracery of this monument and of the side windows of the adjoining cathedral is lighter and more graceful than is common in Italy. Its beauty consists, however, less in movement of line than in richness and elegance of carved and inlaid ornament. Towers were an important part of Italian Gothic architecture. Let us look at them now. The Italians always preferred the square tower to the spire and in most cases treated it as an independent campanile. These square towers were usually built with plain sides unbroken by buttresses and determined in a flat roof or a low and inconspicuous cone or pyramid. The campanile at Florence is by far the most beautiful of these designs. In general, these Gothic towers differ from earlier Romanesque models only in the forms of their openings. The campaniles of Siena, Lusa and Pistoria are built in alternate white and black courses like the adjoining cathedrals. Verona and Mantua have towers with octagonal lanterns. Those dignified in their simplicity and size and usually well proportioned, they lack the beauty and interest of the French, English and German steeples and towers. Secular monuments. In their public halls, open loggias and domestic architecture, the Italians were able to develop the application of Gothic forms with greater freedom than in their church building, unfettered by traditional methods of design. Florence, Bologna, Vicenza, Udine, Genoa, and above all Venice contain palaces and mansions of the 12th, 13th, 14th and 15th centuries, which for simplicity, utility and beauty far excel most of those in the same and other places of the three following centuries. The contemporary churches do not exhibit the same degree of improvement in style that is conspicuous in these domestic works. for there are no works in Europe more worthy of study and admiration than the Ducal Palace of Venice, and some of the older works of the same class, and even the earlier date. The town halls of Perugia, Piacenza, and Siena, and many houses of these cities, and at Corneto, Amalfi, Asti, Orvieto, and Lusa. The fountains of Perugia and Vitrobo, and monuments at Bologna, Verona, and Arezzo may be named as evidence of the interest which the national art affords to the architectural student even in Italy. As late as end of the 14th century, but after it gradually gave way to, though in some instances its influence may be traced even when it had been overborne by a new style. Gothic architecture at other places in Europe, Spain and Portugal. The beginnings of Gothic architecture in Spain followed close on series of campaigns from 1217 to 1252, which began the overthrow of the Moorish dominion. The great Cathedral of Toledo and Burgos began between 1220 and 1230 were the earliest purely Gothic churches in Spain. Saint Vincente at Avila and old cathedral at Salamanca of somewhat earlier date, a mixture of round and pointed arched forms with the Romanesque elements predominant. Toledo Cathedral, planned in imitation of Notre Dame and Burgos, but exceeding them in width, covers 75,000 square foot, and thus ranks among the largest of European cathedrals. Internally, it is well proportioned and well detailed, recalling the early French masterworks, but its exterior is less commendable. Other 13th century cathedrals are those of Lyon, 1260, Valencia, 1262, and Barcelona, 1298. All exhibiting strongly the French influence in the plan, vaulting and vertical proportions. Portugal seems to have adopted Gothic styles very late in its history. Two monuments, however, are conspicuous. The convent churches of Batalha, 1390 to 1520, and Bellum, both marked by an extreme overloading of carved ornament. The mausoleum of King Manuel in the rear of church at Batalha is, however, a noble creation, possibly by an English master. It is a polygonal domed edifice, some 67 feet in diameter and well designed, with a too profuse and somewhat mechanical decoration of panels, pinnacles and carving.